This. Cut this out. And then see where it says document camera?
I'd like to call this meeting of the Bellingham City Council of the Whole to order. We have 3 items before us. The first is the Bellingham Public Development Authority Army Street Project Informational Briefing. Jim, take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Our first item on the agenda, and it has to do with the report on the due diligence work that we commenced in February. It's defined in the Memorandum of Understanding, which you may remember approved June 9th. There's 7 categories of due diligence that comprise the project, and we have finished the first 3. The other 2 are in progress, done by consultants, and then the other 2 beyond that are work the PDA will do when we have the information in hand. So our purpose for this briefing was in keeping with the commitment in that Memorandum of Understanding to undertake the work and then to report on it as it's done. So the first 3 pieces that we have to do with the survey and title search. Remember, this is a land assembly with 9 different parcels of land, some going back to legal definitions done in the mid-1800s. So there's quite a bit of forensic survey work that was involved to come up with the survey. Then the other piece had to do with the Phase 1 environmental site assessment, which was done by geoengineers, and I asked Jay to join me for that part of it. And the third part was the geotechnical analysis. So we have findings from that work that come clean and say with that positive, then we would proceed with the other pieces. We did it in a specific order so we didn't waste a lot of time and money dealing with the dollars and cents of the project until we had those fundamental things that could be deal killers done up front. So I'd like to give a real quick overview of that work. Wilson Engineering prepared the survey. Tom Brewster was the project manager, and he is on vacation, so I will be the surveyor today. If you have a technical question, I'll probably duck it. But what I want to show you here is the look of what we're going to come up with here. And I'll be talking about a summary. And unfortunately, this isn't very readable, is it? Can you read that?
We have
the copies I gave you, this tracks that. Roll it in. Oh, okay. Not help very much.
a little better.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'll read it off. Now, the key to this is a simple color coding. There's a good bit of detail behind each of these criteria, which are on the right. Altogether, we're looking at 55 evaluation criteria, and the composite of those assessments, good, bad, or indifferent, for each one of those would result in an overall determination of feasibility, which we're obligated to provide under the Memorandum of Understanding. On the right, those are the evaluation criteria. They're grouped into 7 categories of criteria, which are on the left. So like I said, I'm here to talk about the 3 that we've finished. And the arrows are just a simple communication tool to summarize more detailed assessments of each of those 55 criteria that are listed on the right. What that means is if it's green and pointed up, that's a good thing. If it's yellow, that means that it's not prohibitory, but it's an advisory that would require further work, could involve a cost, or additional work to mitigate some sort of a potential problem identified at this initial stage. Red is bad. That means that you have a negative impact on feasibility for that particular criteria. So the first step here has to do with the survey entitled, again, that was Wilson Engineering. That work is completed, and there are 5 criteria. Each category ends with the agreement with the PDA's assessment by the other non-city MOA parties. Those are the property owners other than the city. We ask them to accept our determination of feasibility for each of these categories, and then they'll also be asked to accept our determination for the project as a whole when all of the work is finished. So the first part, what we're looking at are internal interior parcel boundary conflicts, and if we have any or if they can be resolved. The package includes the composite of the property. That would be Holly Street on the north, or the top of the page, Central Avenue on the left side there, the north side, Bay Street on the right side, the south side, and then you have the railroad tracks and Chestnut Road are on the bottom of the page. So this shows the makeup of the properties and some of the key topographic features that were identified as we did the work. The results is that, I may refer to that from time to time if you have questions, but that becomes the planning base map for future work, and it defines legally each separate parcel, and it defines the parcel that would be consolidated. So interior parcel boundaries, the results are negligible. There's a couple of encroachments, none that matter if you remember that this is about an assemblage of all these individual parcels into one consolidated parcel. If you have an encroachment of one property crossing the line into another, that's not important if the properties are consolidated, because all these internal lines would disappear and the ownerships are all consolidated into one solid parcel. So internal properties weren't too significant. There are interests on the part of the property owners, because if they're not consolidated, there's some cleanup work they'd have to do. None of it's major. For example, our property is this piece right here, and the property next door actually encroaches on our property about a foot, and that went back to the early 1900s, and it doesn't matter. But we do identify all of those. The second thing has to do, and the more critical one, is the integrity of the outer perimeter of the consolidated property when it comes to abutting rights of way, railroads, utilities, and things like that. Again, what we have is a positive outcome there. Nothing there that would affect the project. Third is the title, condition of title for each of these properties. Is there some encumbrance? That would be a deal killer, and there are none, so that gets a green arrow. Utility easements and rights-of-way conflicts, we looked at those. There's some minor things. For example, a property, an old 1892 sewer line transects these 3 properties up here, which would be a piece of the frame shop, the Cabin Tavern property, the Thornburg property. There's some doubt as to whether or not that line is in service. It's a very deep line. It's 25 feet. If the property went forward or the project went forward, we'd be capping that or relocating it. There would be some cost to that. So we give that, a yellow arrow. Again, not prohibitory. And the last one is the sign-off by the non-city MOA parties, which would be coming. But the survey work is finalized. It's all good, so that gets a clean bill of health and justifies taking the next steps, which was getting into the Phase 1 environmental site assessment and the geotechnical work, and I'll turn that over to Jay.
Thank you, Jim. Jay Gordon with Geoengineers. Mayor Kelly was giving me a hard time wondering if she was going to have to listen to me try to talk about the library again. I am not here on behalf of the library this afternoon. So we were hired to look at the geotechnical environmental considerations for this potential project. And as just a backdrop, I run a small office of a dozen people. The company is headquartered out of Seattle. I've personally have 2 of these multi-story projects going on in Portland, 4 in Seattle, where they're multi-story below grade and several above grade. So when you look at these from an environmental and geotechnical, this is really a feasibility level of analysis. When you look at the environmental, there's 2 reasons you want to do an environmental assessment for a property. One is if you're going to buy it or assemble it, you want to know if you are going to be responsible for a cleanup, because once you're on the title, you actually own the cleanup. And there's some people in this room that are very familiar with that process from various other activities. The other one that's even more of a wild card a bit is a project like this needs funding. And if it's a private-public partnership, if it's a big project, and most of mine are 40 to 140 million, you're going to end up with an institutional lender. So the other question that comes up whenever you try to fund a project is when they start looking, kind of under the sheets, what are you going to find? Excuse me, but it's, it's one of those where is there a surprise? Is there going to be a huge liability or study that has to be done at the last minute? And that's what we're trying to assess. So when you do your environmental site assessment, it's really research oriented. What, and talking to the property owner's historical aerial photos, anything, the old survey information. You look at immediately adjacent properties that could have affected this, as well as the assemblage of properties themselves. You talk to the property owners. So in the historical and current property owners, we found Bellingham in the old days had a gas station about every other city block. There were no gas stations on any of these parcels, remarkably enough. There was just I think it was an automotive repair facility on one property, and that was about it. The adjacent property owners, there are gas stations all around the perimeter of this facility, and of course then the Holly Street landfill is across the site. So what we did is we, for the geotechnical aspects of this project, we put in 7 more borings, put in 3 monitoring wells. We looked at soil samples, put them in the most opportune locations to try to find some kind of continuity maybe or impact from the adjacent parcels. If you're impacted from adjacent parcels, does not mean you are responsible for cleaning it up. It still means, however, if you are going to donate your soil or groundwater to somebody else, you can't do that without cleaning it up or paying an extra price for it. So the main thing that is of a concern on site is that there is what they call uncontrolled fill. This is the old bluff is up by the old city hall, right? So everything is down below here is all fill, and nobody knows what's in that fill. We looked at it. We also had an archaeological research, and an archaeologist looked at the samples. We have no evidence to suggest that either the groundwater or the soil has been impacted. We did not do any testing of soil or groundwater just because there was a lack of physical evidence to suggest that that was necessary to really look at this time. So when you look at our arrows, Mayor Kelly asked me this. As an engineer, I can put them all green because there's nothing, and up if you want, because I can fix anything, it just costs money. But as an engineer and somebody trying to advise someone on buying something, these are slanted just because there's something there, but it's probably it's minor. So when you look at our report and say, okay, on the environmental recognized conditions on the assembled parcel, there's really not much there. Adjacent properties, not much there. Groundwater contamination, we did not see evidence of groundwater contamination. We didn't see evidence of soil. And therefore, at the end of the day, we did not recommend a phase 2, which a phase 2 is typically capturing soil and or groundwater samples, submitting them for chemical testing. And a big lender still could require that at some point, especially if you export soil off-site. And this happens in Seattle all the time, and it's something just to be aware of. It's also something to be aware of on the geotechnical side. And I don't know whether to, I'll allow you, I'll let you ask questions maybe at the end if there are any. I'll go right into the geotechnical. So the site is part of the critical areas. There are many different critical areas. The seismic hazard, erosion, landslide, coal mines, tsunami is not really identified as a hazard, but it is one that we look at. The site is a seismic hazard, as all properties are that are along the waterfront. That can be mitigated by using foundation techniques that are very typical of this type of environment. Erosion and landslide is just because it's got a steep slopes. That would be taken care of during construction. The coal mine does not get to this site, the old Seaholm coal mine. Tsunami and sea level rise. This site is at elevation 20, so it is predicted to be outside of the tsunami range. Sea level rise, it's outside of what is predicted, depending on what you want to believe from whoever you want to believe. But right now, the study that's being mostly used is by University of Washington and the old EDOC, but they predict about 2.5 feet by 2050 or something, and now they're predicting more. But the bottom line is the groundwater is about 10 feet down. Groundwater is impacted in this environment by sea level. So the groundwater will rise at this site, but not to a significant elevation. So one of the things we looked at was we recommended that at the end of the day, you use the existing ground surface as your base. One of the things that Jim wanted to look at was, do you take an extra floor below grade? Like if you've been to the Bellwether has a floor below grade. That's really at groundwater. Do we want to fight with groundwater? Do we want to excavate soil? And I would say at this point, I would not. I would use that existing grade down at the bottom, elevation 20, as your bottom floor. And then the soil conditions are all fill on the outward side, and then as you get up the hill, bedrock is right there at pretty much the surface. So as you go to the southeast corner, Thornburg property, bedrock is like 5 feet down. So if you wanted to go 40 feet below grade, you're going to be taking out a lot of rock. Not a problem, can be done. We've done it. It's just that's an added cost. So when you see subgrade soils and impacts and constructability, there's an arrow there. Bedrock conditions, there's a yellow arrow there. The reason those are there is just because it's got bedrock and it'll cost you a little bit more to excavate it. The subgrade, you're going to have to put stone columns or piles under a building. Again, you have shallow bedrock there. That's the good news. So it's just an expense that the project has to endure, but that's not unusual for a fairly significant structure in this environment. So the foundation and structural considerations are put the same way from the standpoint of there's a yellow arrow there. Certainly something that says, problematic, manageable, or minor, all of those are manageable and pretty typical of a lot of what we're doing these days. A lot of the good ground is built on, as they say. So we just need to be more creative in how you work with these parcels. So at the end of the day, we found nothing in the environmental that really represented a significant impact of the project that we're aware of. On the geotechnical side, it's just a site that's on the waterfront and needs to be treated accordingly, but those are very manageable types of conditions that a normal construction process would take care of. That's it.
So thank you, Jay. The purpose of this information is to avoid nasty surprises as you move forward to the project and you're starting to recruit a developer. They don't come up with something used against you in negotiations to undertake the project. So we do enough work to see, are we running into harm's way on any of these items? And it's good to see that, no, there's nothing unmanageable. The other purpose is to provide input into the financial models that are the last part of the feasibility work based on cost estimates for the building program that's yielded from the market research. So this is going to be cost information that will be combined with the revenue information to do an investment pro forma to see if this makes sense to the property owners to stay in and subvert or coordinate with or contribute their property to the assembly and recruit a developer. So that's the purpose served by this. So we move through that fairly quickly, and where we are now as far as ongoing work has to do with the appraisals and valuation so that property owners agree on the values of their property and therefore their interest in the combined assembled property and the project. And this part, which is the economic and market analysis, which is in progress, these will be coming to us to interpret the data and draw some conclusions, recommend changes in the mix to enhance feasibility, and then the second part of the market analysis is those financial models that I talked about. Other two parts, we have a catch-all phrase, which are things that are identified along the way. The PDA will assess. Construction logistics, for example. Access to that site, because it's a whole, is going to require construction techniques that might, or not might, but will include additional costs. It's just tricky when you're doing subsurface work below it. Impacts of the rail operations, noise, and Jay mentioned the archaeology, which was good, clean. What's the assessment of the review process, and what are the perceived risk factors, and again, do the other property owners agree with what we say? The last piece would be a final screening of the project in its final shape based on the completed due diligence research, going back to revisiting the original strategies and goals under which the PDA operates to see how do we contribute with the project to achieving those now that we know what the project is. So those 7 items result in this composite assessment, which is up or down. And then the property owners, at that point, if it's up, you form the business entity that takes title to the assembled property, and that's when the rubber hits the road. So given that, that's the end of our update and more or less on our time. If there's questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Any questions from council? Yes.
Yes, Jim, with, are you having to change things around a little bit with the market assessment and with the evaluations of the property, the appraisals of the property, given the Thornburg development?
Not really. There's some incremental increase in the work with the properties. Each one gets a certain amount of analysis. But most of our work is dealing with considerations much larger than just this block. So it's not specific to just one parcel or the other. It's just looking at the whole. So, no. A little extra work maybe for the survey, but we needed to know the perimeter. We needed to know the lines that butt up against the other properties. So the whole thing is always anticipated that any one of these properties could withdraw at some point. And in fact, we may want them to, but we're not there. And no, the answer is that there was not a whole lot of work that's dependent on any one particular property, especially on the edges.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your update, Jim. Okay,
Thank you, Jay.
So our next item is somewhat related. It's the withdrawal of Thornburg Trust from the non-binding Army Street Property Owners Memorandum of Agreement. Peter?
Peter Raffato, Legal Department. As stated in the agenda bill, the Bellingham-Whatcom Public Development Authority received notice from the Thornburg estate that is no longer interested in pursuing the Army Street project and withdraws from the Memorandum of Agreement, which triggers a provision under the MOA that the MOA will terminate unless within 30 days following that date the remaining MOA parties provide notice of consent to continue in the process. So in an effort to delineate the different sort of functions that the council is fulfilling here, we have a separate agenda bill to consider that. And the deadline for that will be approximately July 24th. And so really we're here for direction and it can provide some options and points of discussion. In terms of options, obviously the city can give consent as a party to the MOA. And again, just to kind of distinguish council's role and sort of the oversight role, which is under the previous agenda bill. Here it's as a party to the MOA as a property owner in terms of the right-of-way, the Army Street right-of-way, as well as having an option on the port property, which is one of the part of the footprint of what's been identified as the parcels. So the options are to give consent to continue, or to give notice that the city does not consent, and there may be other direction based on council deliberation. And some of the considerations and questions that I think are raised based on prior agreements include, if you go back, and I provided as part of the packet, it's already part of the public record, the previous MOU that was signed last year. If you look at that agreement, it talks about a fairly linear process of going through and establishing the letter of intent, followed by a concept phase plan, which then built it upon itself until you got to the memorandum of agreement. And so the question for the council is, to what extent does the different footprint, which again was kind of the building block and the milestones we saw as part of the MOU last year, to what extent does that change in footprint impact the project? Secondly, to what extent does the potential change in the concept plan impact the project? And I think those are just points of discussion for consideration by council in coming to that conclusion about whether to give consent or not. Some other considerations, it was somewhat raised a little bit, I think, and I think it's just worth more discussion in terms of to what extent does the withdrawal of that piece impact the scope of the due diligence going forward? Is there anything to talk about in terms of is it in fact the case that we need to spend all the same money as was envisioned with the previous footprint, or should that change? And finally, what is the intention of the other property owners, which it's not exactly clear from the MOA, but there's sort of a linear process. The agreement suggests that the remaining property owners, it doesn't say all remaining property owners, but just the remaining property owners need to give that consent. So those are I think the items for council deliberation in terms of whether to give that notice to consent to proceed or not.
Okay, Gene.
Peter, on page 416, the map where it says Thornburg Trust, is that both of the properties on the corner there? I can put the map up. I'm just looking at this map on 416. Is it both those properties with the arrow down there? I see there's two different parcel numbers.
I'm sure Jim would be able to address that. I believe it is both.
Okay.
Yeah, they own both of those parcels. The back part down by the tracks is where there's a Diamond parking lot, and the building itself is on the piece in the far corner. But that's an exhibit from the memorandum of agreement that showed this 7-party deal, and that's what came from negotiations with the property owners last fall.
Other than the one that we own, that's the second biggest parcel, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, which is good and bad. If I can, you want me to show some of the property?
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
We tend to look at the public property, the PDA, and the city's option as combined, okay? Because whatever money is put into the project is recovered from that combined ownership, so that the smaller the project gets, the plus is that the interest in the combined property in the public side of it increases. So if you take the Army Street right-of-way, you see that parcel, the PDA's piece there, which is about 1/4 of an acre, and then you see the option piece behind it, which is the city's, which interestingly enough has never had a building on it, ever. Ours has been vacant for about 80 years. But those together, you can see, provide a supermajority interest in the project. I think together those are all larger than the Thornburg Estate property was, but not by much.
Michael?
I'm wondering if you can share with us what the Thornburg Trust's thinking was. We just saw a clean environmental report, an unremarkable geotechnical survey. The titles are all clear. Those are mostly green, if not, or yellow lights. So what were their concerns? And are they concerns we might share, or are they peculiar to their own situation?
I can take a stab at it. And the article in this morning's paper was the trust manager speaking, which I can enlarge on what he had to say. The rest is speculation on my part. The MOA does not require a reason to be given, and so we didn't ask. We just asked for the to be notified in writing so that we could trigger the review and consideration by all the other property owners. Interestingly enough, I think they had some concern. The building here is a multi-tenant building, so it's the maintenance of tenants and leases during the exploratory phase of this development. It's somewhat of a problem. I mean, you could see how that could be. There probably are some considerations as far as the structure of the trust itself that were problems, and I don't know what those would be, but something that the manager has to be aware of. Bottom line, he mentioned, too, that he doubted about the feasibility of the project in one of the statements he made, which, who knows. I think it's a little early to jump to that conclusion, but I can't say it's not an opinion shared by the other property owners. We asked them, and their review is just like yours. They have 30 days, but they've already responded, and they think it's premature. Let's wait till we have the facts. But a little piece of history that's interesting, about this time last year, this whole process started with a letter of intent, if you remember, and it became a memorandum of agreement. But where we started with that is where we end up. I mean, here's the exhibit from that letter of intent. No, that's not it. It was a 6-party agreement, and that's where we end up. The estate joined later, and if you remember, we had to go back and re-execute it to pick them up. Once we had that as a starting point, that's what we used to prepare the concept plan, which is a reflection of what you might be able to use the entire property for, and reflects the desires of the participating property owners. That's the plan that's being subjected to the testing that's in progress now. What will the market support? We know the land, because of the due diligence that we finished, could support the 330,000 square foot building program, but the withdrawal of this particular property could be a problem if the market analysis shows a demand for the bulk of the buildings being 130 feet. Because the conditions of the Old Town Sub-Area Plan have the maximum building height on that end of the property. If that's not the case, then that property would probably oversupply what the market would support. So that's where we are. If the market analysis shows there is a demand for buildings of that magnitude, I'm sure the estate would seek to rejoin. And the MOA does provide for that, but it requires the unanimous approval of the other property owners.
Pinky?
I want to see if I understand this in layman's terms. Not Kathy Lehman. But the agreement was, or we can't move forward on talking to any developers until we have the solid MOU with all the participants in agreement. So we don't even have any idea right now what the prospects are for development. Is that correct?
We entertain discussions that are pretty general. It's the only way. They could only be general until they know what we're offering, so to speak, and the rationale for it being feasible or not. But yeah, we can talk. But the decision on what to do as a result of those talks, is it a sale of the combined property, or is it a contribution of the combined property for an ownership position in the entire development? That's something that the other property owners would have to unanimously agree on. So the discussions that we have could only be of a very general nature. But as we finish this, we have the ammunition to pitch a project to developers that undertake those kind of projects of that size and type, rather than just a broad shotgun approach.
Yeah, Pinky.
So I'm not a developer, but I'm concerned that this is the corner, this is the visual. This seems to me that this would be the anchor of where a development would go in this particular, that's the highlighted corner. So I'm kind of wondering if our deal is null and void.
Well, there's a school of thought that said that corner and that building may be the most suitable for a historic preservation project and provide a historic preservation project. It is the largest building on the block. But visually, yeah, but as far as being, this whole block is what I'd call a 100% spot relative to downtown and the waterfront because it links the two. And if that's the case, a more north-south axis is going to be important. I think the crossing of the railroad tracks in Chestnut with the pedestrian crossing and the plaza interior to the project puts the center of that project right about here. But the idea is to design it. And what this shows is basically the exhibit from the letter of intent, which did not include this piece, but it does have a fairly workable, contiguous, and significant project right there with the other 6 property owners, depending on the city's position. The other 5 non-city property owners, they want to stick.
A number of years ago, we were faced with another open spot that caused by a fire in our downtown. It was an area called the Pit. It sat there for a long time, and nothing was happening with that. And across the kitty corner from that, there was the Flame Tavern that was kind of falling down a bit, and nothing was happening with that because the owner wasn't going to fix it up, and he wasn't going to sell. Under the leadership of Mayor Osmundson and the City Council, we looked at those projects, and we decided to take some big risks. The mayor showed some real vision with some ideas. We went into a public-private partnership to develop the one corner. We started condemnation against the owner of the Flame Tavern. And we ended up doing the same thing with the hotel, which was having a lot of problems with prostitution and drugs, much like what's happening out on Samish. But we took a big risk, and one of the things the mayor was very clear on for this to work is we needed to move forward in a unified manner because the development community wasn't going to get by unless they knew the city government was serious about the redevelopment of this downtown, and we were going to stand behind it. And we did, and we made it very clear that we wanted this to happen down there, and that we would stand behind it, and it worked. I'm not real surprised when we saw Thornburg Trust withdraw, because that has not happened here. We started this project with a unified effort. We had a mayor who was behind it, a city council that was behind it 7-0, and if the economy wouldn't have tanked, we would have stayed with that, we would have been probably done with it now. But that's not what's happened. We've seen constant attempts to erode it, so it's probably hard for a group to have a whole lot of trust. Is this going to go or not to go? Because we don't have that kind of unified trust. I still believe that we can make this happen, that we can have this redevelopment. If we don't, those lots are going to sit there for a long time. And every time we drive by it, and they're still there, hopefully they're not going to be looking at us who tried to make it happen. Because I think it's going to sit there for a long time. The city by itself has had a very poor track record in terms of alone making the redevelopment happen. And so, I want us to sign on to the MOA, but I sure wish we could get behind it in a unified manner and make it happen. Yes.
Since Mayor came up, I thought I should say something. There's no one more committed to redeveloping our city center than I am. I want to point out, because Terry's very clear, when the city council and the administration get behind something, something can happen. I also want to point out that we did not have a PDA when you did that. And so what we're talking about is not whether or not we should develop, not whether or not our properties should be developed. And we've got most of the properties back except for the Armour Street one, and we are moving forward on at least one of those properties we got back. It's whether or not we can get behind the goal of redeveloping the property, as you did on the Flame, as you did on the Pit, as you did on the hotel. The city did a wonderful job of doing that. Do we need an intermediary to do that for us? Or if we re-employ our community development division, the Patricia Deckers, the Steve, I don't remember his last name. Steve Price, the people that we had working for the city that were intimately involved in that, can we do it that way too? And I think that right now, I don't think that we should say we're not committed to getting development on those parcels. We are on Cornwall, we are on 600 West Holly, we are at the Federal Building, and we are on that Army Street property. But that's different than being committed to how we get there. And I think I'm very optimistic that all the good work that the PDA's done, all the due diligence that they've done, isn't lost. And I think Jim actually said that himself. It's not lost. It's all information that we will need to move forward, whether we have it through the PDA or whether the city takes it on. But I don't want anyone to misunderstand my commitment to the city center. It is there. And secondly, that we absolutely have to have it through the PDA in order to make it happen. I think the city council and the mayor have demonstrated through history on these other parcels that it can be done. You did it. And you're to be congratulated for doing it, because those are very vital properties in the city. So, Terry, I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding about what I'm doing or what I think without me saying it out loud.
I just hate to see 4 to 6 years worth of work torpedoed, so.
It won't be.
But,
it won't be.
Okay, question?
Well, the committee this morning went over the downtown plan. And one of the things in the downtown plan and in the implementation strategy has to do with public-private partnerships as the way we can move the downtown forward. This is a public-private partnership right now. There are 5 entities who, in the private sector, who are asking if we, the 6th partner, is willing to go forward. This is the sort of thing they were hoping for. The city's assets are of questionable value on their own, but when combined with adjacent properties, we're all stronger. It's all more viable. Kelly, I think I do misunderstand. You have said to me directly that you question this project, not just the PDA. You know, we know that you think there may be better mechanisms, but you've also questioned the project. So I am misunderstanding.
I have not questioned the necessity for developing that. And it might be with smaller projects. It might not be the big hotel now that Thornburg's isn't there. And as Jim said, the property's still available. If that's the direction that we have a developer going, we can do that. Public-private partnerships also, it should involve some investment from the private partners. And as far as I can tell, for the whole time that the PDA has existed, the private money hasn't been there. It's been the public money. And there's nothing wrong with the public putting money in. But truly, we need private partners who want to invest and maybe want to pay for part of the due diligence that the city is providing now. There isn't just one way to do it. And so I think I agree that there might be a different project that could go there, or this project, but the project plan that we had now was a concept plan that no longer is the same as it was before, because one property, moved out, so we have to redo the concept if we don't have those people involved. And I think Jim's done a good job of trying to meet the criteria that was set out for him. So I'm not complaining about anything now. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that these projects can still happen with a public-private partnership And I believe they can happen with or without the PDA. That's all.
Well, but we have 5 enthusiastic partners, and we still have a sizable chunk of property. Thank you.
Jack and then Jim. Or,
So Terry,
yep.
and, Terry and Jean, you were the two that were, from that intersection where Little Cherfield is, and those 3 different projects, and at each one of those intersections, how much private investment was happening prior to the time that ground really broke? It seemed to me, from my, what I remember, was that it was all city investment at the up until the time that ground finally broke, and that's when the public-private happened.
Not until we took definitive action on condemnation, and once that happened and we showed our end, then it started to come in.
And with the pit, you're right. There was no public money, private money that went into that. The city did all the feasibility studies for that. They did the geophysical work. They did the feasibility study. They did all the work, put the money up front to make this happen, and then found a partner to partner with. Yeah, very much what we're trying to do with this project. Yes, we did the feasibility, we showed what could be done, and then worked to find a partner and to make that project work. Jim?
With an additional very important tool, it's more normal for the city to actually acquire the property by market value payments or eminent domain condemnation, and then hope to go forward. But you shell out that initial capital, which is true risk, okay, not the studies. That's
Right.
0.5% of what we're talking about. When you're actually assembling the property, which is the case, and you've got a broad portfolio of city-owned properties that are sitting there. What for? They could be sleeping assets, but you need the tool to unlock it short of condemnation. What you have in this case is these property owners, which I feel compelled to speak on their behalf. What makes this difference is that here you have an ownership position in the project itself, as they do, and a channel to recover the investment and make a return on that investment, cash on cash, not just in public purposes. But to do that, the property owners are contributing their property values as a capital investment in return for that ownership. What you're spending, you would recover from the project just like they would. They are putting in a significant capital investment, which makes this quite different, I think, from anything that you've ever seen here. And that should not be ignored. Where you have that kind of local property owner initiative, it would be a shame to squander that. But the PDA is considered to be a public corporation, which allows you to be a voting member of that business entity. Rather unique.
Jack?
I wanted to make a motion to provide direction to the administration. Okay. It's okay. Okay, but this is something for you to hear. Make a motion to provide direction to the administration to come back on July 21st with the necessary documents to extend our memorandum of agreement with the other parties.
Okay.
Second?
We have a motion, second before us. Yes.
Can I ask clarification on the second part that you said, Jack? You're asking the city to come back with,
We're being asked to whether or not we need to extend this agreement. The party has pulled out.
oh, you,
Do we want to continue with this project and understand the market potential of it, the appraisal of all the other parcels? We still don't know that information. If we end up pulling out right now, we're pulling the plug on the whole thing. If we choose to go and continue with this project, we'll get some additional information. We'll find out, whether or not this is a viable project, and we'll find that out within probably, 6 weeks maybe? 6 to 8 weeks?
and the contract is up on September
Correct.
anyway, so we would have to figure this out before then.
Yeah, and that would be another decision point is in September.
Basically, this just what the motion is to provide direction for us to continue with the memorandum of agreement without Thornburg Trust. That's the change of it. Michael? And then,
Yeah, basically, as I understand it, our 5 partners have already said, yes, this is the way we officially say yes to. Our way is more cumbersome. We direct through the staff. Documents have to be written. This is how we say yes.
okay, Mayor and then Jim.
And just to be clear, I think Jack said nothing will happen if this agreement isn't extended, and I don't think that that's true. There could still be appraisals done on the property. There could still be the due diligence continued. So it isn't that if we don't, I mean, and it's fine if you want to do it through the PDA, that's fine. But it isn't that it won't happen if we don't extend our agreement. It will happen.
Jim and Jean.
You may or may not have the property owners agreeing to continue under that basis, though. You can't assume that. And I wanted to point out that I mentioned the non-city parties all have that same 30 days. We happen to have had a property owners meeting Friday week, a regularly scheduled meeting. They put quite a bit of sweat equity into this already, participating in these meetings. I raised the question. I had received the notice from Thornburg, so I asked them, canvassed them if they were willing to stay in or wanted to. No reasons required. And they said yes. The PDA board meets Wednesday week. I can't speak for them. They have to take this under consideration and reconfirm continuing with the process of the MOA or not. But that is for them to say. So 4 other non-city people have already signed in. I've asked them for written statements confirming that, which I've received most of them already. Our board will act on Wednesday week, which, I would expect they would go forward. So the city's position is the last one. Anyone can drop out. The other people have 30 days to consider the implications and ramifications, and that's all this is.
Yep. Okay, Jean?
Are you talking about extending it past September?
No, just to continue, well, with whatever the terms are of the MOA, to continue those terms, to acknowledge the fact that one party has withdrawn, and that the remaining parties, such as the city, would want to continue on.
And if I may, this actually work is laid out in the Memorandum of Understanding that was the June 9th document for the 2014 work. And that MOU anticipated, we didn't know how many properties are going to be in and out, and it talks about the feasibility determination based on a sufficient number of the properties continuing to go forward as we did the work. So it's not tied to a specific number of properties. We would be the first to say that if the project does not make dollars and cents sense, none of the property owners can be expected to risk their properties to go forward. They'll withdraw. So would we. The language in this MOU and the MOA gives us the right, without having to give a reason, if we find something that just doesn't work, our job is to say, it doesn't work, I'm sorry, no harm, no foul. And that's what we would do.
Peter?
I just want to make sure that the motion is clear because I heard 2 different things. One is to prepare a document, which I assume would be voted on at the next council meeting, and then there was a suggestion that we are actually in a vote maybe tonight would happen tonight. I don't know which the case is. Is
Well,
it
if you feel like you can prepare the document for tonight, I didn't think so. I thought,
my assumption is that you would have the vote at the next meeting.
yeah.
On the 21st?
But we would vote tonight to give, to confirm that direction.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? We have a motion, second before us.
You have a second?
What?
You have a
Yeah.
second? Okay.
All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will make that recommendation for a full vote tonight to give the direction. But you pretty much have that direction. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 2 items down, 1 more to go. And this is a work session regarding a rental registration program. Let me see here. Okay. So Peter?
Yeah.
You're the lead on this?
Peter Raffato, Legal Department. I just want to take a moment to explain what you have in the packet in terms of the 3 different versions of the ordinance. But just to give the background, there was direction on June 9th. The council directed staff to prepare 3 versions of a rental registration ordinance for consideration by the Committee of the Whole. The 3 versions included what has been referred to as the base ordinance. Secondly, the base ordinance revised to reflect registration only. And the third one, which gets a little confusing, we've called option 5. And that was as described in the June 9th meeting. So in terms of what you have in the packet, you have the base ordinance, which has been revised because council made a motion on June 9th, or maybe it was the committee, I don't recall right now. The committee had a few amendments to the base ordinance. Those revisions are reflected in that first ordinance, as well as some technical changes. And then when you get to the second document, I basically accepted those changes, but then made further revisions to reflect it being registration only. And then for the option number 5, I just described, I think, some minimal language that would have to be changed. And the one thing I would say is that if you look at the registration only ordinance, you will see a fair amount of language regarding inspections. And that's because there's still a tool that was there all along, which would say that you may use an inspection requirement as part of the code enforcement process. It wouldn't be a regular inspection or a percentage of inspections every year. I think it would be a seldom used tool. But basically, you'd be saying if we had notice of a code violation, we may pursue the regular code enforcement options that are currently under the code, or you may say, before you register and get a renewal, you have to get an inspection. I think that would be a seldom used tool because I think we would generally probably have to pursue some sort of warrant process, so I don't want to overemphasize it, but I want to leave the language in because it may be a tool that could prove valuable. And that's why that language is in there.
But with that one, there's no base inspection, percentage inspection, okay. Clarify it. Gene.
Just to get this started, I was the one that made the motion for the draft-based ordinance with revision since June 9th, 2014. So I want to withdraw that motion. Do I need to make a motion just to eliminate that as part of the 3? If we're going to have a public hearing, I don't want that one as part of the public hearing.
Well, as I see it, your previous motions were just to prepare these for presentation to council, so I don't think you have any sort of main motion that you have to rescind or anything.
Okay, the way I see the process right now, these 3 options are out there, not necessarily the only options, but they're the ones that were here. We'll only vote on those where there is a motion to vote on that. For any of the options to move forward, we need 4 votes for that. And so we can open it up for discussion, motions, whatever. Okay, Michael and then Roxanne.
Well, first, it was my understanding that the next step would be a public hearing. Is that everyone else's understanding?
If there are 4 votes for something,
okay. Well,
and then a vote to go to a public hearing, then that would be the case.
I really only see 2 options. The base ordinance without option 5, I don't think probably has support. So I'm only seeing 2 options with registration only and with option 5, both of those on top of the base ordinance or modifying the base ordinance. So I would move that we schedule a hearing on those simultaneously on those 2 options.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second before us, but we will have comments. Don't worry, Pinky, I'm sorry.
My comment is I think sometimes we make it a little confusing at our public hearings, and people aren't quite sure what we're asking of them, and things aren't very clear. So my preference is we put 1 forward, but if we are going to put 2, that we spell it out very clearly and simply for people to understand.
Yeah. And, yes, Roxanne?
Well, you can imagine, everybody who's been watching this knows this has been quite the roller coaster of an issue for us to work on. So I just want to start with a little bit of information about what I've been through with all of this and what we've all learned along the way. So we know that this has come before the council before, and it has been shot down. And then we're right back where we started from. So my goal with this is to not get back to that situation. So that's why I came up with the registration only, but it also includes complaint-based code enforcement and building inspections. I want to make that really clear for the registration only side. You know, we really need to work with the business community and with our rental community at the same time on this, because I worry that if we do mandatory inspections, that what will happen is that the rental associations, organizations, and property owners will then do a filibuster like they've done before here and done in so many other cities, and we will be back at square zero, not even square one, with a negative council vote. So also, at the same time, I think this city has unfortunately turned too much of a blind eye to code enforcement, and I really think it's time for us to clean up our neighborhoods and our streets. That's for the betterment of every single person who rents a place. It will show the rental property owners that they cannot rent janky properties out to people in the neighborhoods. And also, I just think it's for the betterment of everybody that lives on those streets. So I know that people have worried about fear of retribution with a complaint-based system. I understand that completely. But I hope this will change the whole process, because the complaint will not go to your property owner. The complaint could come to the city. The city then could work to remediate that issue with the property owner. So hopefully there wouldn't be as much fear when you'd have a better partner and a better broker to work on those issues. Also, I want to make it clear that we do a great job of working with property owners to not be punitive. We really want to work with the property owners to address this in a way that works for the property owner and the renter, and only if we need to get punitive. I also just want to say this is the option that I've been advocating for with registration only is a starting point. You know, we can grow this as we need to, but unfortunately right now we don't have the statistics that show that this is something that really needs this much attention. We can grow the story with time as we understand the program and then add in inspections if we don't find that we're addressing the actual issues. So I am not going to be supporting going with both of these. I just want one.
I also am not going to support going forward with both of them. I think we need to start with one. People can comment if we have 4 votes on any of them, but that people at a hearing can comment and we see what happens with it. Frankly, I think we should have had the hearing when the mayor first presented an ordinance, but the committee did have a lot of meetings and couldn't come up with a decision, so they came back to us for us to make a decision. And I don't think a good decision is that, oh, let's throw them all out there. I think we need to decide on a base one that if we're going to have a hearing, that we have the hearing on, we take public comment, we listen, and then we make our decision. So I'm going to vote no on that. Jack.
So in order to respond to you, Pinky, what I think what should happen is, I mean, Peter's offering up the legal perspective of what these options are based on the way that he's written up the ordinances. What I would suggest is that we have Mark Gardner, our policy analyst, be the one who presents to the public for the public hearing, where he's able to go and show what the 2 options are, or the 2 proposals are, in a way that, you know, people can then understand. You know, it really is, it's getting down to a philosophical difference. Do you want to obtain data so that you understand whether or not there is an issue or not through doing inspections, or do you want to just do a registration program and do what we've been doing all along, which is a complaint-driven system. And those are really the two philosophical differences that I think that we're having to decide. And because I don't think anybody here, possibly anybody here, is opposed to having the registration component. It's just whether or not there's an issue about whether we do inspections and we gather the data to know whether or not there's a problem inside the units itself. So my suggestion would be is that we'd have Mark and Peter give the presentation associated with the public hearing to explain what those two options are. Let the public then be able to respond back to us in a very clear way.
Michael?
Thanks, Jack. You put it pretty clearly. I think it really is a very simple choice that will be the topic of the entire hearing. Same base ordinance, same authority, same mechanisms for both of them. The only difference is, do you want to have a proactive inspections component or a complaint-only system? So the hearing isn't about multiple proposals. It's about one particular issue that separates the two versions. Shall there be a proactive component, or is it complaint-based only? So I don't think it's going to be a confusing hearing. I'm hoping that we do a good job of making that clear so that we don't spend too much of the hearing explaining what's going on, but rather debating the issue kind of at a philosophical level.
And Michael, I have to disagree, because the hearing may very well be about should we have an ordinance at all. There isn't just two options because we want two options. The public has the right to bring up whatever they want, and it might very well be no options. And, you know, so there are some philosophical differences. You're probably right. But I'm going to give a little history. I hate to do this, but I have to because Gene and I are historians here. We've been involved in this thing for a long time. And just for, you know, we have a couple new people here that maybe don't know the history of this thing. This came about originally by a guy that lived on the south side who was calling to issue a number of complaints about a certain developer that was allowing a lot of loud parties at night. And he wanted the landlord held accountable to keep them quiet and keep the nuisance, keep the garbage picked up, keep the nuisance picked up. And this spread from a number of different neighborhoods. This originally started as a landlord, looking at registration so we could find out the names of the different absentee landlords and to look at holding landlords accountable for the tenants' behaviors. And, you know, there was I know up in some of the other neighborhoods, they were upset because a certain developer, again, the same developer that the Southside person was complaining about, was building 4-bedroom single-family homes in their neighborhoods and renting them all out to students as boarding homes, basically illegal boarding homes. And we were looking at all of these and looking at the complaints and the parties and other things. And we went with that for a few years working on that. And there were a lot of meetings with it. But in the meantime, the university and the city started working on a lot of those specific problems. They started the party patrol. They started doing a lot of education and things. And a lot of those problems started going away in certain parts of the neighborhoods. I know in our neighborhood they went down substantially because of the education. And we targeted a lot of those specific issues. When this came up again, it was still aimed in that direction, but it wasn't getting traction, and then it was reframed to tenant safety issues to try to get the university students on board, and it started getting more traction. But that's not where any of this started. This started as a way to get landlords accountable for. And we've dealt with some, but we still have to deal with, again, some of the same problem landlords. Most of the landlords are great, and we know that. And the idea of having inspections to see if we have a problem. Because one of the things we did when we first brought this up, and we're doing it for quite a while, is we looked at all the complaints, we've looked at them again, and we don't see the record to support how many, that there has been that many complaints to justify doing that. And so just a little history of how we got to here, that it didn't start with this part. Jack.
Pinky was first.
Oh, sorry, Pinky.
Again, I hesitate in having two options put forth. Even as I started campaigning for city council, one of the first issues that people asked me about was what was I going to do about safety and rental registration. I think we have heard from a lot of people. Every single city council meeting has an aspect of this. We've heard a lot of comments, we've heard emails, we've had the university students, we've had petitions. I think what people are asking from us is to put something forward and to act on that. And I fear that if we put two more options on the table for a public hearing, that it's just going to go farther and farther of the nebulous of what everybody wants. And I'd like to see something clear go forth that people can comment on and we can vote on, and we can start enforcement of the property owners who are not being responsible and safe and actually see some action. So that's what I'd like to see.
Okay. Anything else on this specific motion about putting both on? Jack?
I wanted to comment on your history, and I respect the fact that you have that, that angle on it. I came onto council well after all of those discussions, and I came into this wanting to promote a rental inspection program and registration program. I came into it without any of that history. I come into it from my own perspective and my own professional perspective of being a property manager of a number of different units, as part of a property management company, and understanding what that industry is like. And I agree with you, Terry, that most of the people in this industry do it the right way. The problem is that there are some that don't. And we don't have good data collection because we don't do inspections. We have no real good mechanism to be able to deal with it. And I am really concerned about the fact that, my own personal experiences from being both professional and personal of being a renter and having to go through the same types of things, I really feel like we are shortchanging 54% of this community, and that's the renters, and then also many homeowners that have to go and deal with bad conditions of having structures that are substandard being next to them and having their own property values affected by it. There's a number of unintended consequences to all of this, and I think that we need to be cognizant of that. And I really feel that, having both of these options out there for the community to be able to respond to, number one, I don't feel like it poses any sort of undue influence to or inconvenience or confusion for them. In fact, we just went through something earlier a few weeks ago with Peace Health, where Gene, he was wanting to have actually two different options proposed. We ended up only having one option out there, but when we were listening to the public, they weren't responding to what was being proposed. They were responding to another proposal that wasn't out there. That wasn't something that the council actually put forward. That's what we heard with 98% of the comments that we heard out of the public was a proposal that wasn't even on the table. And so what I'm suggesting and what this motion I believe is putting forward is that let's put both of them out there. We know that that's what the public's going to respond to both, one or the other. And you're right that there might be a third option of just like let's not have anything. Well, that was the same thing with Peace Health, too. You know, some people were just saying, you know, let's not touch the hospital. So, I mean, they'll have the opportunity to go and say that as well. But I think let's play it straight with the public and just have both of them on the table. I think it would, you know, it's going to happen anyway, and I think for transparency purposes, for, you know, for government to public, that we should just be at least straight with them. And just
My
simply do
question, is it being necessarily straight with the public because you want both out, or we want to make sure our own, you know, we are looking at it as a council, and we are looking at the one, just like we did with Peace Health, which ones that we favor. From, you know, and that's what, you know, if we decide on one. But, Mayor, does this relate to the two of them? Okay. I'm trying to keep this.
I think you're doing a good job. Just to talk about multiple things being out there, the citizens, as Terry said, I think would probably appreciate knowing where the majority of the council stood. They can make comments on anything, even with the Peace Health idea. If the council had wanted to change from the full meal deal to a compromise, you could have done that, but you chose not to. So you were letting people comment on the one that was out there, and it didn't matter if there were other proposals, because that's part of public comment, is to know what's being proposed and then make their comments about it. That is probably the clearest thing to do, because if the public wants something else, they're going to come and tell you, Jack, that they do. And I'll save my comment about presenting the ordinance after you have this debate.
Okay. So, seeing no comments, so we have a motion and second before us. All those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. So,
3-3.
motion fails.
So I'll
3-3.
move Councilwoman Murphy's option to the public hearing.
It's registration only?
Yep.
So that would be which one in the packet
Option
is
2.
that, Peter? To
Number
be
2.
specific.
Yeah, that's the second one in the packet.
The second option in the packet, registration only. So and who seconded?
Me?
Oh, yeah.
I should have let her
Okay,
make the
Jean,
motion.
yes, and Roxanne. Okay. I thought, but I wanted to make sure, so we got it on the record who did that. Comments? Jack?
So, Roxanne, I just want to be clear, because you've mentioned this in committee when we were talking about it, is that your experiences in the city of Tacoma brought you to this point of wanting to do registration only. So you're wanting to, I guess, look at the Tacoma experience as being what you'd like to bring into Bellingham?
Let me clarify, please. My dream is this simple. If you are a renter and you have mold in your apartment, you have one simple phone number that you can call in City Hall. And that will determine whether a code enforcement person or a building inspector will come out and look at that issue, work with the property owner and with the renter to hopefully resolve the issue. And then if the property owner doesn't do anything about that, then we need to figure out what we need to do beyond that. And we have different code enforcement tools that we can use to actually get people to work with us to remediate those issues. That's my dream.
Well, I find it interesting that you used mold as being one of the examples, because mold is not one of the items that we can actually regulate according to the state of Washington. You know, I've talked with the clean air people and you know, our own internal people. We can't regulate mold, and I don't understand, because you've used the term about wanting to do exterior look at the building and the yards as to whether or not there should be a complaint driven to that property, and that's the way it is in Tacoma. I've got the Tacoma ordinance here and what they have here. license only applies to rental housing units after a complaint is received and after an initial exterior building inspection demonstrates that the building condition does not meet the established threshold of tenant health and safety. How do you tell whether or not there's an electrical problem or a heating problem or a water problem?
Through complaints or through that eyeball look.
Okay, so then you're
Councilmember,
basing...
please speak with respect to me.
I'm talking to the issue.
Yeah. Jack?
I'm talking to the
could
issue.
you speak to the
So
issue and not the motives of the council person,
I want to
please?
understand how that type of language of going to looking at an exterior condition of a premise is going to be able to go and tell what's going on the inside, and then to have a tenant is supposed to be the expert on whether or not their place is met the health and safety conditions. It's like asking the dishwasher in a restaurant to go and make a complaint to say, I think there might be E. coli on the counter. They don't know. The only way that they can tell is whether or not a restaurant's going to, a health inspector from the health department is going to be, inspected. So that's why, I'm not questioning you or your motives. I'm talking about the program. I'm very interested in having an effective and efficient program, and I feel that having registrations and just doing the registrations without having any sort of real inspections to gather the data that you personally said that you want, you're not going to get any data if you don't go out there and actually collect it. And we have already got the complaints going on. And we don't have very many complaints because there's retaliation, there's intimidation, there is ignorance about what exactly there is associated with, minimum health and safety issues.
Pinky?
I think one thing we've made really clear to everyone is there has to be an educational element to this program. And that is our responsibility to educate people and to provide that through many services that we have here in Bellingham that can help in regards to that education. And we can also have a community committee that could figure out what exactly those guidelines should be so that there is buy-in and credibility from many organizations. So I think the opportunity to do all of those things is still there.
Call for the question.
Seeing no further comments, all those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? So I don't hear any abstentions or any noes, so I'm assuming it's a 6-0 for.
I have no choice, Terry, so
Okay.
I guess I'm voting yes to what is.
Right.
I won't say anything.
Okay. Yes. Kelly. Mayor.
I think there was a suggestion that council staff present the ordinances, and I would feel very comfortable with you guys debating and putting things in context, or if you'd like Mark to come and say something, but planning and legal need to be the ones that actually present the ordinances, and then there can be whatever discussion you want after that.
And I think the chair should work with on the decisions of presentations.
Okay.
That's okay. Okay, moving right along, we did approval of minutes, old and new business. Let me see.
I have an old business. Or
I've
new
got to
business.
find. Yes, Mayor Shelley.
Michael had asked for some statistics, and the police chief is sending you all what they've compiled, and we'll be happy to come to your next meeting, not tonight, but your next meeting, with answer any questions or explanations that you might want. So there should be something in your mailbox that gives you the number of calls they had and that type of thing.
Does that have to do with fireworks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's the only thing you asked me for this noon, so
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We will now be, at this time, the council meeting will adjourn to executive session. Executive sessions are closed to the public. A report will be given at the regular meeting. A governing body may hold an executive session only for specified purposes, which are identified in RCW 42.30. We have two items before us today. One is litigation, Nash versus City of Bellingham et al. The second one is potential property acquisition. These items will take approximately 30 minutes, and I'm going to add a couple minutes so for people to get there. So we will return in approximately 35 minutes, which brings us, where does that bring us? To 25 after 5. Oh, my goodness. Okay.